my friends, I know these past few weeks have been very painful for all of us in different ways. We're trying to make sense of the unthinkable acts and face the harsh realities that have surfaced as a result. Anti-Semitism continues to rear its very ugly head all around the world. And this feels particularly painful in this country because progressive Jews have spent years supporting racial equality, gay and transgender rights, abortion rights, and other causes that the American left sometimes having to also oppose Israeli policies in Gaza and the West Bank in order to fit these progressive circles, and are now feeling agonizingly abandoned by those who they long thought of as allies. Individuals and groups who claim to care the most about social justice and justice in general and human dignity have somehow spun the narrative that saying that the Israeli victims, really the Jewish victims, somehow deserved this terrible atrocity. In their article about progressive Judaism and Jews, Jennifer Medina and Lisa Lur point out that many of the most inflammatory comments that came on social media from progressive groups that responded to the aftermath of the attack skipped even a moment of mourning and instead moved immediately to try to justify the attack. Joanna Ware, the executive director of the Jewish Liberation Fund, further points out that many people around the world don't have a level of sophisticated understanding of anti-Semitism. And I'll add to that they're not interested in learning about it either. These are unprecedented times filled with challenge, anguish, and perhaps worst of all, ignorance. One of my favorite teachers, Dr. Zohar Raviv, also always said that the world is filled with surfers and not divers. Not just having to do with anti-Semitism or Middle Eastern politics. People will read a headline and think they've become expert in any field without understanding the complexity that really lies below the surface. In recent weeks, the author of the book, Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, Yossi Klein Halevi, has written quite a few pieces to help us understand the difficulty of what's happening in Israel and unpack some of what's involved. In a piece entitled, What This War is About, he begins by articulating that the support that he seeks from others is based on the understanding that Israel faces a genocidal regime on its southern border, that regime must be destroyed not for the sake of Israelis living in Israel, but for the sake of the entire region, and that the only way to destroy a terrorist infrastructure embedded in a civilian population is the way that the IDF is proceeding. He describes the fact that initially, after the attack, the outpouring of sympathy for Israel was good for their souls, especially in those traumatic first days. But we all know that much of that sympathy would begin to evaporate with the terrible scenes of devastation in Gaza. And we also knew that given the choice, he says, Israelis prefer to be condemned than pitied. He says that necessarily, in the immediate aftermath of the massacre, Israel disseminated the atrocity photos and brought foreign journalists to the scene of the slaughter. But in the face of growing suffering in Gaza, the political effectiveness of those images would be fading. We need to make our case against Hamas, not by seeking the world's pity, but its understanding, he says. Halevi clarifies that Israelis are not engaged with the Palestinians in a competition for victimhood. The Palestinians will always win that competition, and rightly so. In opting for power, the Jewish people opted out of the victimhood competition. There was a price to pay for the loss of innocence. We have no choice but to own it, but those who caution against invading Gaza rarely offer Israel an alternative. Would they prefer that Israel bomb Iran? Not to react decisively carries potentially greater danger for Israel than military miscalculation. If this war ends in another Hamas-Israeli stalemate, the Iranian front along our borders will become far more emboldened. This has never been the Israeli-Palestinian conflict alone. For most of the last 75 years of Israel's existence, it was an Arab-Israeli conflict, and in recent years, the Arab-Israeli conflict has been supplanted by the radical Shiite-Israeli conflict. And like the Arab world a generation ago, the radical Shiite axis is committed to Israel's destruction. To focus only on the fight in Gaza is to misunderstand what is happening here. This is war with Iran by proxy. Halevi acknowledges the challenges of the Palestinian people. For the dead, he says, and the wounded among Gazan civilians, it obviously makes no difference that Israel didn't intend to harm them. But intent is the difference between war as tragedy and war as barbarism. Halevi argues that many around the world, and not only Israel haters, are raising the argument that the occupation drives Palestinians to terrorism. But the reverse is no less true. Terrorism has reinforced the occupation by convincing Israelis that withdrawal from the West Bank would turn into another Gaza. The fatal miscalculation of Israel's enemies is that they mistake Israel for a rootless colonial project that will go to the way of Rhodesia and white-ruled South Africa. Inflict enough atrocities and the Jews will flee back to Poland. Palestinian apologists never say back to Iraq or back to North Africa, which is where a majority of Israeli Jews come from. By the way, including your very own Rabbi. I am an Arab Jew. My parents were born and raised in Morocco and Tunisia. There is no back to Eastern Europe. Yossi Klein Halevi also reminds us that Israelis have reacted to existential threat as they always have. Close to 200,000 Israelis have flown back home since the massacre, many to join their reservist units. The demand has been so high that the Israeli airline El Al has allowed passengers who couldn't book seats to sit on the floor for returning flights. The failure of the Palestinian national movement in all of its faction is to understand that it is not facing, not a colonialist entity, but a re-indigenized people whose story is unique in history, and this is the main reason why this conflict has been unsolvable. Until that perception changes, even Israelis like Yossi Klein Halevi, who see a two-state solution as an existential necessity for Israel, will also see it as an existential threat. This war is a chance for Israel and its friends to change the narrative of colonialist Israel that has taken hold in much of the West, and to restore a measure of complexity to the discourse on the conflict. Pardon me. As Reformed Jews, we often talk about the importance of tikkun olam, the repairing of the world. Halevi reminds us that tikkun olam is a commitment to simultaneously enhance good and also diminish evil. Tikkun olam is not only about social justice. Defeating Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union were ultimate expressions of repairing the world. He argues that destroying Hamas is a tikkun olam imperative. The unfortunate reality is that so many people are looking from afar and finding such creative ways to perpetuate the hate of the other. If people truly care about the Palestinian people, which we all should, they would help them rather than encourage them to attack Israeli civilians intentionally. Hate is easy. Hate is 140 character friendly. It makes for easy slogans of stinging propaganda. Hate includes intimidation of students on campuses, ganging up on the vulnerable. Hate is also cheap. It's a cop-out, it's weak. Love and peace, those take work. Human beings are such creative, thoughtful entities. We are capable of solving hatred, but must be willing to do the work. Shalom, or peace, is our only option for the future. For those of you who were here the other evening on Wednesday night for the L'chaim Through Time class, we listened to some stories of Palestinian citizens and their desire for peace. The Center for Peace Communications created an inspiring project, which I invite you all to please look at, called Whispered in Gaza. This is a collection of animated video testimony that enables residents of Gaza to candidly describe their lives, struggles, and aspirations to a global audience. I will share my personal favorite of these stories, a woman they called Mariam, who is a professional dabke dancer. She believes in the power of art to improve the world. She explains that after Hamas gained control in Gaza in 2007, they told her to stop dancing and study Quran instead. When she refused, they began to threaten her family. She shares that since taking power, Hamas has clamped down on women's basic freedoms and artistic expression deemed as un-Islamic. In July 2022, Hamas banned street concerts because Hamas has imposed unjust measures, one musician told Al Monitor, as it deemed art and music to be against Islamic law. In 2021, Hamas ruled that women require the permission of a male guardian to travel. In 2018, Hamas blocked the launch of a women's television channel and banned the opening of a ballet school for girls. In 2017, it banned dog walking to, quote, protect women and children. My favorite line comes towards the end of her interview when the interviewer asks her, "How do you see this current crisis ending?" She replies, "Hamas needs to go away. They're a burden to us. Maybe you'll laugh at me, but if the Israelis were here, it would be a million times better. They don't interfere in our personal affairs. Gaza needs to be liberated." The Palestinian people are also held hostage to Hamas. So what do we do with all of this in this moment? Of course, I turn to Torah. In this week's Torah portion, Lech Lecha, we read, "Vayomer Adonai el Avraham, Lech Lecha me'artzecha u'mimolodetecha u'mebeit avicha el ha'aretz asher arecha." God says to Abram, "Go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing." My friends, in partnership with God, we must now create blessings that will carry us into the future, make our name great so we can be a blessing for the world. As Jewish people, we have a special responsibility. This responsibility does not only belong to us, but we are obligated to participate in it. That obligation is shalom. Our tradition is rooted in shalom. And shalom, of course, we always associate with peace, but the root of the word shalom is shalem, meaning whole. We must fight to make our world whole. This work and our tradition recognizes that, and it recognizes the complexity. Genesis 12:14 reads, "Vayelech Avram kasher diber elav Adonai, vayelech ito Lot, ve'Avraham ben 5 shanim ve'shiv'im shana betzeto mecharan." Abraham went forth as Adonai had commanded him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. Abram was older, at this point, and he had to uproot himself at 75 years old. There is a recognition that this is hard, and we must do things that are hard for the greater good, for peace, for shalom. We must uproot ourselves from the comfortable, from the familiar, from the normal, and practically do a 180. We must get uncomfortable with complacency. We must go above and beyond, and now is the time. Hate must be wiped out and fought with intense love and shalom. And here are 4 things we can start with. Several of you have reached out to me about difficult conversations you've had with friends who have been supportive of Hamas, and I thank you for sharing those really difficult conversations with me. I have encouraged you to lovingly and peacefully engage with those individuals. Share how you are feeling and your understanding of what is happening. Help them understand this is not an Israel-Palestinian issue, but a deeply rooted hatred of Jewish people. Help them understand that by supporting Hamas, they are supporting violence of innocents and kidnapping of hostages. Israelis have similar interests to the Palestinian civilians, and we must harness our commonality and build upon it rather than promote our differences. Looking in from afar, people think they are promoting humanitarianism, but really they are driving people apart and supporting hatred of the other. Secondly, we must continue to protect Israeli civilians. And in many ways, it's as if Israel is going through COVID all over again. Schools and businesses are shut down because of the barrage of daily rockets they are receiving, and they are spending most of their days in bomb shelters. People have to be home and close to those bomb shelters. 350,000 reservists have been called away from their normal day jobs and pulled away from their families to protect Israeli citizens of all faiths. These are Muslims, Christians, Druze, and Bedouins. There are many who still need medical attention, especially in this time, and our American leaders and government need to know that their support is invaluable to us at this time. So please continue to reach out to them and thank them for their support of Israel. No matter what side of the political spectrum they are on, this is not a partisan issue. It is a humanitarian one. Thirdly, we must also support Israel financially through any organization that speaks to your heart. Our federation in Cleveland is doing a wonderful job raising money for Israel's emergency fund and supporting over 200,000 displaced Israelis in the south that have no home to return to. And lastly, 5 years ago today, we witnessed a horrific act of violence at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. A gunman murdered 11 people who were peacefully praying at their temple. We saw then, just as we are seeing now, that hatred and ignorance lead to violence that we cannot afford. Each and every single one of us is responsible to educate the world about who the Jewish people are and the values that we live by. And at the same time, we must educate ourselves Jewishly and historically and understand what we stand for, inviting our friends of other faiths into our journey. Hanukkah is just around the corner. If each member of our community invited 5 to 10 people of a myriad of faiths into their homes for one night of lighting candles and sharing the light of peace and love and resilience in our community would look very different moving forward. We each have a responsibility to promote what Judaism stands for. We must continue to advocate. We must continue to be advocates of peace and justice. We continue working and making our world a better place. Our work in social justice must double down. Now is the time to act, and every person that is here physically, live streaming, or watching this sermon at a later date is responsible. Now is the time to exercise your voice and promote peace through our tradition. If we ever want to see peace in the Middle East or within our own borders, we must begin the work, maybe not now, but yesterday. We have no time to lose. We see people in our country, young people on college campuses, getting harassed and assaulted for being Jewish. If we say never again, we must mean never again. One of our beloved congregants and former president of our temple, Marilyn Dadoun, shared 2 letters with me that were sent to the president of the University of Pennsylvania. In one of the letters, and others like it, thank God, have been sent as well, the writer expresses their deep anguish in the university's inability to speak out about the hatred and horrific acts against Israelis. Moreover, they are withholding their current donations to the university. And one such letter concludes with the following statement: enough. It is time to reverse this trend and restore our elite universities to the principles upon which they were founded, as places of inquiry where lively debate, diversity, and opinion, and communication across the lines of difference is not only cherished, but actually mandated. We must all play our role through action, words, redesignating funds perhaps, and finding ways to stand up against injustice and promote peace, a peace that applauds diversity. We must fight hate with love. Shabbat Shalom.